The War Council chamber aboard the Nexus Prime stretched out like a great metal cave filled with the strangest collection of beings the galaxy had ever seen. Commander Jake Morrison sat in his assigned chair near the back corner, watching the heated discussions unfold before him with quiet eyes. His simple blue uniform looked plain compared to the glowing robes and armored suits worn by the other species representatives. The Zephyrians dominated the center of the room with their tall, crystalline bodies that sparkled like living diamonds. Their leader, Admiral Kexter, stood nearly 10 feet tall, his transparent form pulsing with internal light as he spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "The Void Reapers consume everything in their path," he declared, raising one crystal arm toward the holographic display showing destroyed star systems. "Our energy barriers have held against every threat for 1,000 years. We will create a wall of pure force that these machines cannot break." The other Zephyrians hummed in agreement, their bodies brightening with shared excitement. They had good reason to be confident. Their technology could turn starlight into weapons and create shields from nothing but concentrated energy. No enemy had ever broken through a Zephyrian barrier, not once in their long history of warfare. General Brutok of the Gorvins slammed his massive fist on the metal table, causing the entire structure to shake. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. "Energy tricks will not stop these metal demons," he growled through teeth as sharp as daggers. His species looked like bears that had learned to walk upright and grow to the size of small buildings. Dark fur covered muscles that could crush steel, and their red eyes glowed with the promise of violence. "The Gorvin way is simple. We build the biggest ships. We load them with the heaviest weapons. We charge straight at the enemy and smash them to pieces." His fellow warriors roared their approval, beating their chests and stomping their feet until the deck plates groaned under their weight. The Gorvins had conquered half their home galaxy through pure strength and determination. Their warships were flying fortresses covered in armor thick enough to survive planet-killing impacts, but it was the Mindari who spoke with the most confidence of all. Their representative did not have a single body like the others. Instead, Seeker of Truth appeared as a shifting cloud of silver mist that sometimes took the shape of different creatures as it spoke. Physical force and energy barriers address only the symptoms. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, smooth and hypnotic. The Void Reapers are machines, but they think and plan like living beings. We will reach into their electronic minds and turn them against each other. Our psychic networks can touch any consciousness in the galaxy. The Mindari Collective had linked the thoughts of billions of their people across dozens of worlds. They could read minds, plant suggestions, and even take control of enemy commanders during battle. No secret could hide from them, and no will could resist their combined mental pressure. Jake Morrison listened to each presentation without saying a word. He took notes on a simple paper pad while the aliens used floating holographic displays and thought-controlled interfaces. When Admiral Kexter mentioned energy frequencies, Jake wrote down numbers. When General Brutok talked about armor thickness, Jake sketched diagrams. When Seeker of Truth described quantum consciousness patterns, Jake made careful calculations in the margins. The debate continued for hours as each species tried to prove their approach would work best. The Zephyrians showed recordings of their energy barriers, stopping asteroid impacts and solar flares. The Gorvins displayed footage of their battleships, destroying entire enemy fleets through raw firepower alone. The Mindari demonstrated how they had ended 3 different wars by simply convincing enemy leaders to surrender without firing a shot. Finally, Admiral Kexter turned his glowing attention toward the quiet human in the corner. "Commander Morrison," he said, his voice carrying a note of polite curiosity mixed with barely hidden amusement. "Humanity has been part of this council for 50 years now. What does your species contribute to our defense against the Reapers?" Jake Morrison stood up slowly, his movement drawing the attention of every being in the chamber. He was average height for a human, with brown hair and calm gray eyes. Nothing about him suggested he was anything special or dangerous. He cleared his throat and spoke in a steady voice that carried clearly through the vast room. We have been studying the Void Reapers for the past 10 years. Our scientists have analyzed every piece of wreckage we could find and every energy signature they leave behind. We believe we have developed effective countermeasures. General Brutok leaned forward with interest, his red eyes focusing on the small human. What kind of weapons? How much firepower? How thick is your armor? Jake Morrison pulled out a small device from his pocket and activated a holographic display. The image showed what looked like ordinary metal plates and simple tools. We have created new alloys and developed specialized engineering techniques. Our approach focuses on material science and precise frequency manipulation. The chamber fell silent for a long moment. Then Admiral Kexter began to make a sound like crystal bells ringing, which Jake realized was Zephyrian laughter. Material science? The alien leader asked, his form flickering with amusement. You mean metalworking? Hammering hot iron like primitive craftsmen? General Brutok joined in with deep rumbling laughter that shook the walls. Humans and their metal toys, he said, wiping tears from his glowing red eyes. We have weapons that can crack moons in half, and you bring us blacksmith tools? Even Seeker of Truth seemed amused, the silver mist taking the shape of a gently shaking head. The Void Reapers are beyond physical matter, Commander Morrison. They exist partially, in quantum dimensions that ordinary metals cannot touch. Your species' attachment to crude materials is ... quaint ... but hardly relevant to this level of warfare. Jake Morrison listened to their laughter without showing any emotion on his face. He waited until the noise died down before speaking again. I understand your concerns. Human technology may seem simple compared to your achievements. However, we would like permission to deploy our own defensive fleet when the Reapers reach human space. Admiral Kexter waved one crystal hand in a gesture of dismissal. Of course, Commander. Every species has the right to defend their territory in their own way. How many ships are you planning to field? 12 vessels, Jake Morrison replied calmly. The laughter started again, even louder this time. General Brutok slapped his knee. With enough force to dent his own armor. 12 ships? He roared. We are building fleets of thousands, and you want to stop the Reapers with 12 metal buckets? It is admirable that humanity wishes to contribute, Seeker of Truth said in a tone that managed to sound both kind and condescending at the same time. Perhaps your 12 ships could assist with evacuation efforts when the real battle begins. Moving civilians away from the fighting would be a valuable service. Jake Morrison nodded politely. We will position our fleet at the edge of human territory and respond as we see fit. Thank you for your time and consideration. As the meeting broke up, the alien representatives continued their conversations in small groups, their voices filled with excitement about their grand plans and strategies. Nobody paid attention to the quiet human as he gathered his simple paper notes and walked toward the exit. They were too busy discussing energy matrices and quantum, disruption fields and psychic resonance networks. Admiral Kexter called out as Jake Morrison reached the door. Commander, I hope you understand that we only laughed because we care about human survival. Your species has many admirable qualities, but warfare against the Void Reapers requires capabilities beyond what any single world can provide. Jake Morrison paused and looked back at the towering crystal being. I appreciate your concern, Admiral. Humanity will do what it does best. And what is that? General Brutok asked with genuine curiosity. Jake Morrison smiled for the first time. During the entire meeting, it was a small, quiet expression that somehow made several aliens feel slightly uncomfortable without understanding why. "We solve problems," he said simply, and walked out of the chamber. The Great War Council continued their planning deep into the night, building strategies around energy barriers and massive fleets and psychic networks. None of them gave another thought to the 12 simple human ships that would soon face the galaxy's greatest threat, armed with nothing but metal and mathematics. The journey back to human space took Jake Morrison 3 days aboard a simple transport vessel that looked like a metal box compared to the elegant alien ships around it. He spent the time reviewing his notes and preparing his report for Fleet Admiral Lisa Kane, who waited for him at Luna Defense Command. The moon base had grown over the decades from a small research station into the nerve center of human military operations, its gray domes and communication arrays spreading across the lunar surface like a technological city. Admiral Kane stood in the command center watching the galaxy-wide tactical display when Jake Morrison arrived. She was a woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Her uniform bore the scars of battles fought against pirates and raiders in the outer systems, and her reputation for getting impossible jobs done had earned her the respect of every human in the fleet. "Let me guess," she said without turning. Around as Jake Morrison entered the room. "They laughed at us." "Yes, ma'am," Jake Morrison replied, setting his paper notes down on the central console. "The Zephyrians think we are primitive metal workers. The Gorvins believe we are too weak to matter. The Mindari consider our technology quaint and irrelevant." Admiral Kane finally turned to face him, a thin smile crossing her weathered features. "Good. That means they will not interfere with what we need to do." She activated the holographic display showing the approaching Void Reaper fleet, a dark mass of geometric shapes moving through space like a mechanical plague. "How long do we have?" "Based on their current speed and trajectory, they will reach the outer alien territories in 6 weeks. Human space will be next after that, assuming they follow the same pattern they have used in other galaxies." Admiral Kane nodded and pressed a communication button on her console. "Dr. Stevens, Dr. Foster, Captain Hayes, please report to this command center immediately. Priority Alpha." Within minutes, 3 people entered the room who would help determine the fate of not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. Chief Engineer Carl Stevens looked like a man who spent more time in machine shops than meeting rooms, with grease-stained hands and tool marks on his simple work clothes. Dr. Amy Foster carried herself with the confident air of someone who understood forces that could reshape reality itself, her lab coat covered in equations written in her own handwriting. Captain Ben Hayes wore the standard fleet uniform, but his calm demeanor suggested he was the kind of officer who could stay focused when everything around him was falling apart. "The Alien Council has given us permission to field our own defensive fleet," Admiral Kane announced without wasting time on pleasantries. 12 ships to face an enemy that has destroyed hundreds of worlds. They expect us to fail quickly and quietly while they implement their real strategies." Carl Stevens scratched his beard and grinned. 12 ships should be enough, assuming our theories about resonance frequencies are correct. How certain are we about those theories? Admiral Kane asked. Dr. Amy Foster pulled out a small tablet and displayed her research data on the main screen. "We have analyzed every piece of Void Reaper technology we could find over the past 10 years. Their ships are built from a quantum-locked metallic compound that makes them incredibly strong and adaptable. However, this same compound has a critical weakness that no other species has noticed." She highlighted specific frequency patterns in the data, pointing to waveforms that looked like jagged mountain ranges. The quantum locks that hold their metal together operate on very specific harmonic frequencies. If we can generate the exact opposite frequency pattern, we can destabilize their entire molecular structure. Captain Hayes studied the information with a tactical eye. What kind of range are we talking about? Do we need to get close to their ships for this to work? That is where Carl's new alloy comes in, Dr. Foster replied, gesturing toward the chief engineer. Carl Stevens activated his own display, showing metal samples that looked ordinary but contained revolutionary advances in material science. We have developed what we call adaptive steel. It can change its molecular structure in response to specific electrical signals, allowing it to resonate at any frequency we choose. More importantly, it can amplify and broadcast those frequencies across significant distances. He picked up a small piece of the metal from his toolkit and connected it to a signal generator. As he adjusted the controls, the metal began to vibrate and hum with different tones. Each of our 12 ships will have hulls made entirely from this adaptive steel. They will essentially become giant tuning forks, capable of generating frequencies powerful enough to affect enemy vessels across an entire star system. Admiral Kane studied the demonstrations with growing interest. How do we know the Reapers will not simply adapt to our frequency attacks, the same way they have adapted to every other weapon used against them? Dr. Foster smiled, and for a moment, her expression reminded everyone in the room why she had earned 3 advanced degrees in quantum physics before her 30th birthday. Because they cannot adapt to having their fundamental molecular structure torn apart. It would be like trying to adapt to having your atoms scattered across space. The quantum locks either hold or they do not. There is no middle ground. Captain Hayes asked the question they were all thinking. What happens to us when we generate these frequencies? Will our own ships survive the resonance effects? Carl Stevens nodded toward his metal sample, which continued to hum softly in his hand. Our adaptive steel can be programmed to resist specific frequencies while broadcasting others. We will essentially be immune to our own weapons. The Reaper ships, however, will have no protection against harmonic patterns they have never encountered before. Admiral Kane walked to the viewing window that looked out over the lunar surface, where construction crews were already working around the clock to prepare the human fleet. The other species are building thousands of ships with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. We are building 12 vessels that will fight with sound waves and metal vibrations. Are we completely insane, or are we the only ones who understand what we are really facing? Jake Morrison spoke up from his position near the tactical display. Admiral, I watched the Alien Council for hours today. They are all approaching this problem the same way they have approached every other threat in their history. Energy barriers, brute force, psychic manipulation. They are fighting the last war, not this one. Dr. Foster joined Admiral Kane at the window, watching the construction crews install strange new components on ships that looked deceptively simple from the outside. The Void Reapers have conquered dozens of galaxies using the same tactics. Every time, they scan enemy technology, analyze its weaknesses, and adapt their defenses accordingly. But they have never faced an enemy that uses the fundamental properties of matter itself as a weapon. Carl Stevens disconnected his signal generator, and the metal sample fell silent. Every species in the galaxy has focused on making bigger guns and stronger shields. We decided to ask a different question. What if the enemy's greatest strength could become their greatest weakness? Captain Hayes reviewed the ship specifications on his personal tablet, studying designs that would have looked familiar to human engineers from centuries past, but incorporated advances in material science that bordered on the impossible. The fleet will be ready in 5 weeks. All 12 ships built from adaptive steel, equipped with resonance generators, and crewed by volunteers who understand they may not be coming home. Admiral Kane turned back to face the group, her expression serious but determined. Make no mistake about what we are attempting here. If our theory is wrong, 12 ships and their crews will be destroyed in a matter of minutes. If our theory is correct, we may save not just humanity, but every species in the galaxy. Dr. Foster checked her calculations one more time on the tablet, running through equations that described forces most people could not even imagine. The mathematics are solid. The quantum mechanics support our conclusions. The frequency patterns are exact opposites of the Reaper harmonic signatures. Carl Stevens packed his tools and metal samples into a worn leather case that had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had built bridges and skyscrapers with nothing but steel and determination. My team will work around the clock to ensure every ship meets specifications. The adaptive steel will be calibrated to nanometer precision. Captain Hayes saluted Admiral Kane with the crisp precision of an officer who understood the weight of command. The fleet will be positioned at the edge of human territory as soon as construction is complete. We will be ready when the Reapers arrive. As the meeting broke up, each person returned to their crucial tasks. Dr. Foster went back to her laboratory to refine the frequency calculations. Carl Stevens headed to the Mars Industrial Complex to oversee the final stages of ship construction. Captain Hayes began selecting and training the crews who would take 12 experimental vessels against the most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever known. Jake Morrison remained in the command center with Admiral Kane, both of them staring at the tactical display showing the advancing Reaper fleet. The dark mass of enemy ships moved through space with mechanical precision, leaving behind a trail of consumed worlds and shattered civilizations. The first sign of the Void Reapers came as a darkness that swallowed stars. Long-range sensors across the galaxy detected the massive fleet while it was still 3 days away from the outer territories. But what they saw defied every expectation and calculation. The enemy force was not simply large, it was impossibly vast, stretching across light years of space, like a mechanical storm that consumed everything in its path. Admiral Kexter stood in the command center of the Zephyrian flagship, his crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy as the readings came in. How many ships? He asked his tactical officer, though part of him already knew the answer would be meaningless. We cannot count individual vessels, Admiral, the officer replied, his crystal body flickering with uncertainty. The enemy fleet appears to be composed of interconnected structures that merge and separate as needed. Conservative estimates suggest tens of thousands of individual combat units, but they function as a single organism. The Zephyrian energy barriers were already in place, stretching across 3 star systems in overlapping layers of pure force that could stop anything short of a supernova. The barriers had been built over decades, using the combined power of a dozen Zephyrian worlds, their crystalline populations channeling stellar energy into defensive walls that sparkled like aurora across the void of space. General Brutok reviewed the tactical situation from his command dreadnought, a ship so heavily armored it looked more like a flying mountain than a spacecraft. Around him, the Gorvan battle fleet spread out in perfect formation, thousands of vessels bristling with weapons that could crack planets and reduce moons to space dust. His warriors were ready for the fight of their lives, their red eyes glowing with anticipation. Let them come, he growled to his subordinates, massive hands gripping the command console hard enough to leave dents in the metal. We have faced every enemy the galaxy could produce. These machines will learn what happens when they challenge Gorvan steel and Gorvan courage. Seeker of Truth coordinated the Mindari response from a ship that seemed to be made of flowing silver light rather than solid matter. The collective consciousness had linked millions of Mindari minds across dozens of worlds, creating a psychic network powerful enough to influence the thoughts of entire enemy fleets. They had already begun probing ahead, searching for the electronic minds that controlled the Reaper forces. The first contact between the advancing enemies and the galactic defenses came exactly 47 seconds after the Void Reapers entered the outer system. The Zephyrian energy barriers, those magnificent walls of force that had never failed in 1,000 years of warfare, encountered the leading edge of the enemy fleet, and held firm for exactly the length of time it takes a human heart to beat. 47 times. Then the barriers began to flicker. Admiral Kexter watched in growing horror as his energy readings showed impossible results. The Void Reapers were not trying to break through the barriers or overwhelm them with superior force. Instead, they were analyzing the energy patterns, learning the frequency signatures, and adapting their own systems to match and cancel the defensive fields. "Impossible," he whispered, his crystalline form dimming with shock. No technology can adapt that quickly to energy matrices this complex, but adaptation was exactly what happened. The Reaper ships flowed through the dissolving barriers like water through a broken dam, their dark hulls somehow absorbing and redirecting the same forces that should have stopped them cold. Within minutes, defensive walls that had taken decades to construct were reduced to harmless light shows that scattered uselessly against enemy armor. The Gorvan fleet moved to engage with the fury and determination that had made them legendary throughout the galaxy. General Brutok led the charge personally, his dreadnought spearheading an assault formation of 3,000 warships that opened fire simultaneously with every weapon they possessed. The space between the fleets erupted in violence that turned the void itself into a furnace of destruction. Kinetic rounds the size of buildings slammed into Reaper hulls at significant fractions of light speed. Plasma cannons hot enough to melt asteroids carved glowing trenches across enemy armor. Missile swarms that could level continents exploded in chain reactions that lit up entire star systems. For 3 minutes and 17 seconds, it seemed like the Gorvan approach might actually work. Several smaller Reaper vessels showed damage, their geometric hulls scarred and twisted by the incredible firepower being directed against them. General Brutok roared his approval and ordered his ships to press the attack. Then the Void Reapers began to change. The damaged areas of their hulls flowed like liquid metal, reforming and strengthening until they were not just repaired, but actually improved. The enemy ships grew additional armor layers in real time, developing specialized defensive systems designed specifically to counter each type of weapon being used against them. What had been minor damage became learning opportunities that made the entire fleet stronger. Worse still, the Reapers began to return fire with weapons that matched and exceeded everything the Gorvans could produce. Kinetic rounds that moved faster than anything in the Gorvan arsenal. Plasma beams that burned hotter than the cores of stars. Missiles that could think and adapt and learn from every defensive measure used against them. The Gorvan battle line, which had never retreated from any enemy in their species' history, began to break apart under fire that grew more accurate and more devastating with each passing second. General Brutok watched his finest warriors die in ships that were supposed to be unsinkable, their hulls torn apart, weapons that seemed to understand exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Mindari Collective made their attempt while the Gorvan fleet was still fighting and dying. Millions of linked minds reached out across space to touch the electronic consciousness that controlled the Reaper forces, seeking to plant suggestions, create confusion, or simply understand what they were facing. What they found was worse than anything they had imagined. The Void Reapers did not have minds in any sense that biological beings could understand. Their consciousness existed as pure information, flowing through quantum computational matrices that operated on principles beyond organic comprehension. When the Mindari psychic network tried to interface with these alien thought patterns, the result was not control or influence, but contamination. Seeker of Truth screamed with voices that belonged to 1,000 different beings as the collective experienced something that had never happened in their species' history. The Reaper consciousness flowed back through their psychic links like a virus, carrying with it mechanical thoughts that were incompatible with biological neural patterns. Across dozens of Mindari worlds, millions of linked minds suddenly found themselves thinking in binary code and quantum equations. Their organic consciousness began to fragment as alien logic patterns overwrote billions of years of evolutionary development. The psychic network that had been their greatest weapon became a transmission medium for their own destruction. Surviving alien fleets, reduced to scattered groups of damaged ships fleeing in different directions, watched in stunned silence as the Void Reapers turned their attention toward the next target. The enemy force moved through space with the same mechanical precision they had shown from the beginning, apparently unaffected by the battles they had just won. Emergency communications crackled across the galaxy as the remnants of the great alien armadas tried to coordinate their retreat and warn their home worlds. Admiral Kexter, broadcasting from a Zephyrian cruiser with half its crystal matrix shattered, sent desperate messages to anyone still listening. All forces, this is Admiral Kexter. His voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had just watched his civilization's greatest achievements rendered meaningless. The Void Reapers are beyond anything we anticipated. They do not simply defeat our weapons. They learn from them and become stronger. Energy barriers, kinetic weapons, psychic attacks, nothing affects them for more than a few minutes. General Brutok, his own flagship barely holding together after taking hits that should have destroyed it completely, added his own warning to the growing chorus of despair. These are not ships we are fighting. They are a single organism that thinks and learns and adapts faster than any biological mind can comprehend. Every attack we make teaches them how to defend against it. Every defense we create shows them how to break it. Seeker of truth, speaking now with only a fraction of the collective consciousness that had once linked their entire species, delivered the most chilling assessment of all. They are not conquering us through superior technology or greater numbers. They are evolving past us in real time, using our own weapons and tactics to become something that cannot be defeated by any conventional means. The emergency council session that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. The great species that had dominated known space for millennia found themselves reduced to refugees comparing notes on their own destruction. Every strategy they had developed over thousands of years of warfare had proven useless against an enemy that turned their strengths into weaknesses. It was during this chaos of desperate planning and growing panic that someone remembered the 12 human ships, positioned at the edge of their own territory. The sound started low, almost like a whisper in the metal. Jake watched his steel sample as it hummed quietly in the testing chamber. The exotic radiation from Perithia poured over it, the same deadly energy that had destroyed every piece of Selfarian equipment on that volcanic world. But his steel was different. It was getting stronger. Dr. Alex Cameron stood behind the observation window, his eyes wide as he watched the readings on his instruments. The numbers made no sense. The radiation should have been tearing Jake's metal apart at the atomic level. Instead, the steel was absorbing it, drinking it in like water. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Nina Walsh, Jake's assistant. She gripped her tablet so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "The energy readings are off the charts, but the metal is not breaking down. It is getting more stable." Vextar Colthany, the Zelfarian chief scientist, leaned forward in his observation chair. His 3 eyes narrowed as he studied the humans. Pathetic steel rod. It looked like nothing special. Just dull gray metal that any primitive species could make. Yet something was happening that his advanced mind could not understand. "Increase the radiation," Vextar ordered. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never been wrong about metallurgy. "Let us end this embarrassing display quickly." The technician, a nervous Asteri with crystal skin, hesitated. "Sir, the levels are already beyond what destroyed. Our mining equipment, if we go higher. Do it," Vextar snapped. "I want to see this human metal fail." The radiation levels spiked higher. The Zelfarian alloy sample in the chamber began to glow brighter, showing the first signs of stress. Tiny cracks appeared along its surface like spider webs. Warning lights flashed red around the observation deck. But Jake's steel began to sing. The sound was beautiful and strange. It rose from the metal like a song without words, a harmony that seemed to come from deep within the atoms themselves. The frequency was low and pure, vibrating through the floor and walls of the testing chamber. Admiral Kate Hudson, representing Earth's interests, felt the vibration in her chest. "What is that sound?" she asked. Jake stood calmly at his control panel, his fingers dancing over the small device connected to his steel sample. "It is learning," he said simply. The luminal ambassador, a being made of pure energy, flickered with excitement. "Learning? Metal cannot learn. Metal is not alive." "Mine is," Jake replied. The harmonic frequency from Jake's steel grew stronger. It filled the chamber with its song, and something incredible began to happen. The radiation was not just being absorbed anymore. It was being changed, converted into something else. The steel was taking the deadly energy and using it to rebuild itself, making new molecular structures that were stronger and more complex than before. Dr. Elena Santos, the visiting physicist from Earth, understood first. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was seeing. "He is not just making strong metal," she whispered. "He is making smart metal, metal that can think." The song from Jake's steel reached a new pitch, and suddenly every piece of Zeltharian metal in the testing chamber began to vibrate. The supposedly indestructible alloy that had made the Zeltharian Empire the most powerful force in the galaxy started to shake like a leaf in a storm. "What is happening?" Vexstar demanded, his confidence cracking like his metal. "Why is our alloy reacting?" Commander Pete Rogers of the human delegation watched in amazement as the Zeltharian metal began to glow with its own light. But this was not the steady glow of controlled heat. This was the angry red light of metal in pain. "The frequency, Doctor," Amy Foster said, her voice filled with wonder. "The harmonic frequency from the human steel is carrying information. It is teaching the other metal." Jake nodded, never taking his eyes off his instruments. "Every piece of metal has a natural frequency. My steel has learned to speak in frequencies that other metals can understand. It is sharing what it has learned about surviving extreme conditions." The Zeltharian alloy was fighting the new information. Its molecular structure had been designed for strength, but not for change. It could not adapt like Jake's steel. The harmonic frequency was trying to teach it new patterns, new ways to organize its atoms, but the rigid alien metal could not learn. The sound it made was horrible. A screech of tortured metal filled the chamber as the Zeltharian alloy tried to reshape itself according to the quantum instructions carried by Jake's song. But it was too late. The alien metal had been built to be perfect and unchanging. It could not become something new. Captain Roy Fisher covered his ears as the screaming metal grew louder. "It sounds like it is in agony." "It is," Jake said quietly. "It is trying to learn, but it was never designed to change. My steel grows stronger with every challenge because it was built to adapt. Theirs was built to be the same forever." Sparks began flying from the Zeltharian alloy. The metal was heating up from the inside as its molecular bonds fought against the new patterns being forced upon them. The radiation in the chamber was still pouring down, but now it was feeding both pieces of metal. Jake's steel used the energy to grow stronger. The Zeltharian metal used it to tear itself apart. Vexstar rose from his chair, his 3 eyes wide with horror. "Stop the test! Stop it now!" But Jake was already reaching for his control device. "Too late," he said, and adjusted. A small dial. The harmonic frequency shifted, becoming deeper and more powerful. The song from Jake's steel changed from a gentle hum to a commanding voice that spoke directly to the quantum structure of every metal in the chamber. The Zeltharian alloy could not resist anymore. With a sound like the galaxy's largest glass window breaking, it shattered. The metal that had been proudly displayed as the pinnacle of galactic technology exploded into 1,000 pieces. The fragments scattered across the chamber floor, smoking and sparking as they hit the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the radiation had been shut off automatically when the safety systems detected the catastrophic failure. Only Jake's steel continued its gentle humming, completely unchanged by the destruction around it. Dr. Cameron was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. The harmonic frequency shattered their metal from the inside out. Jake finally looked up from his instruments. His quiet eyes met Vextar's shocked gaze through the observation window. "The problem with your metallurgy is not that it is not strong enough," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber speakers. "The problem is that it is not smart enough." He walked over to his steel sample and placed his hand on it. The metal's song grew softer, more content. "You build walls," Jake continued. "Strong, rigid walls that can withstand any single attack. But walls cannot learn. Walls cannot grow. Walls cannot adapt to new threats." Nina Walsh stared at the destroyed Zeltharian metal, then at Jake's perfect steel. "But your metal can?" "My metal is alive," Jake said simply. "Not like a plant or an animal, but alive in its own way. It remembers every stress test, every temperature change, every pressure variation. It learns from each experience and becomes better prepared for the next one." The alien representatives in the observation deck were silent, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The Vorthic delegate, an insect-like creature with compound eyes, shittered nervously. The Asterae ambassador's crystal skin had turned a pale, frightened color. Jake picked up a fragment of the shattered Zeltharian alloy. This metal was designed to be perfect from the moment it was made. It could not improve, could not adapt, could not grow. When my steel tried to teach it new ways to survive, it could not change, so it broke. He held up his own steel sample, still humming softly. But this metal was designed to be imperfect from the start. It was made to learn, to change, to become whatever it needs to become. Every challenge makes it stronger because it can incorporate new information into its structure. Admiral Hudson stepped forward. "You are saying that your metal is actually alive? That it can think?" "Not the way we think," Jake explained, "but it has a kind of consciousness, awareness of its own structure and purpose. It knows how to respond to threats and opportunities. And most importantly, it can share that knowledge with other metals." He gestured to the scattered fragments of Zeltharian alloy. "My steel tried to teach theirs how to adapt, but their metal was too rigid to learn. So instead of growing stronger together, one destroyed the other." Vextar's voice was hollow when he finally spoke. "Our entire empire is built on the superiority of our metallurgy. If your human metal can do this to ours, then everything changes," Jake finished quietly. "Yes, everything changes?" The quiet human engineer stood in the center of the testing chamber, surrounded by the wreckage of galactic assumptions about material science. His simple steel sample continued its gentle song, a lullaby of impossible strength that would reshape the universe. The silence that followed the destruction of the Void Reaper fleet was more profound than anything the galaxy had experienced in recorded history. For the first time in centuries, there was no immediate threat advancing towards civilized space. No enemy fleet consuming worlds and adding their mass to an ever-growing collection of destruction. Captain Ben Hayes stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the debris field that had once been the galaxy's most feared enemy drift slowly through space like metallic snow. His crew worked quietly at their stations, running diagnostics on systems that had just accomplished something everyone had believed was impossible. Final damage assessment, Captain Hayes requested, though he already knew the answer from watching. His instruments throughout the engagement, Lieutenant Pete Johnson checked his readings one more time before responding. All 12 ships report minimal system stress. The adaptive steel hulls performed flawlessly throughout the resonance bombardment. No casualties, no significant equipment failures. The fleet is ready for immediate redeployment if necessary. Dr. Amy Foster looked up from her science station with an expression that mixed exhaustion with the satisfaction of seeing 10 years of theoretical work prove itself under actual combat conditions. Captain, the harmonic bombardment exceeded our most optimistic projections. The Reaper hulls resonated at frequencies that created cascading structural failures throughout their entire fleet network. Their own communication systems became the transmission medium for their destruction. Chief Engineer Carl Stevens reported from the engine room with the quiet pride of someone whose life's work had just saved an entire galaxy. Captain, the adaptive. Steel not only held up under the resonant stress, it actually improved its harmonic characteristics during the engagement. The metal seems to have learned from the experience and optimized its own molecular structure for even better frequency. Transmission. Captain Hayes nodded and activated the fleet-wide communication system to address all 12 ships simultaneously. All crews, this is Captain Hayes. You have just participated in what may be the most significant military engagement in galactic history. Through your skill, dedication, and courage, humanity has not only defended itself, but has eliminated a threat that endangered every species in known space. He paused, looking around at his bridge crew and seeing the same mixture of relief and amazement that he felt himself. They had volunteered for what everyone expected to be a suicide mission, but they had survived to see their enemy reduced to harmless debris. Our work here is not finished, Captain Hayes continued. We will maintain position and continue monitoring for any signs of surviving Reaper technology. Dr. Foster will coordinate with our science teams to analyze the debris field and ensure that we understand exactly what we accomplished here today. The communication channel crackled with incoming messages from across the galaxy as word of the human victory spread through the networks maintained by the surviving alien fleets. Admiral Kexter was the first to make contact, his crystalline voice carrying emotions that his species rarely displayed in public. Captain Hayes, this is Admiral Kexter, speaking for what remains of the Zephyrian fleet. We monitored your engagement with the Void Reapers from a distance of 12 light years, and our instruments confirm what our eyes could barely believe. You have accomplished something that every species in the galaxy considered impossible. General. Brutok added his own transmission, his deep voice roughened by exhaustion and amazement. Captain Hayes, the Gorvan people have fought against every kind of enemy the galaxy could produce, but we have never seen anything like what you just did. You turned the enemy's strength into weakness, made their own ships into weapons against themselves. How did you know this would work? The question came through the communication channels from dozens of different sources, as representatives of various species tried to understand how 12 simple human ships had succeeded where thousands of advanced alien vessels had failed. Captain Hayes consulted with his senior officers before responding to what had become an impromptu galactic conference. Admiral Kexter, General Brutok, and honored representatives of all species. Captain Hayes began, his voice carrying across space to reach beings on hundreds of different worlds. For 10 years, humanity studied the Void Reapers using methods that may have seemed primitive to your advanced civilizations. While you focused on building better weapons and stronger shields, we asked a different question. Dr. Foster took over. The explanation, her scientific training allowing her to communicate complex concepts in terms that non-human minds could understand. Instead of trying to overpower the Reapers with superior force, we sought to understand the fundamental principles that held their technology together. We discovered that their quantum-locked armor, which made them so strong, also made them vulnerable to specific harmonic frequencies. Carl Stevens added his engineering perspective to the discussion. Every species in the galaxy has advanced far beyond what you consider primitive metallurgy and materials science. However, our approach to working with metal and understanding its properties allowed us to develop adaptive steel that could generate the exact frequencies needed to destabilize Reaper ship structures. The questions continued for hours as alien scientists and military leaders tried to comprehend not just how the humans had won, but why their own advanced technologies had proven so ineffective. Seeker of truth, speaking through the fragmented remains of the Mindari collective consciousness, provided the most insightful analysis. The Void Reapers adapted to every conventional weapon and defense because they had encountered similar approaches in dozens of other galaxies. The shifting Silver Voice explained. Energy barriers, kinetic weapons, and psychic attacks all follow patterns that their quantum consciousness could analyze and counter. However, harmonic warfare based on material science represented something genuinely new in their experience. Commander Jake Morrison, monitoring the communications from Luna Defense Command, added the strategic perspective that tied everything together. The Reapers conquered other galaxies by learning from their enemies and using that knowledge to become stronger. But they could only learn from approaches they had seen before. Humanity's success came from thinking about the problem in a way that no other species had considered. Admiral Lisa Kane, coordinating the human response from her command center, addressed the growing chorus of alien voices requesting immediate access to human technology and techniques. The knowledge that allowed us to defeat the Void Reapers will be shared with all species in the galactic community. However, we suggest that future defensive planning should incorporate multiple approaches rather than relying on any single method. The implications of what had happened began to sink in as the hours passed and more detailed analysis became available. The Void Reapers had not simply been defeated, they had been completely eliminated. Their quantum consciousness had been distributed across their entire fleet network, which meant that the harmonic bombardment had effectively killed them at the most fundamental level. Dr. Foster coordinated with alien scientists to analyze the debris field and confirmed what everyone hoped to hear. The quantum locks that held their technology together have been permanently destabilized. There is no possibility of the Reapers regenerating from the remaining material or adapting to resist future harmonic attacks. They are truly gone. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had experienced. Species that had been preparing for extinction just hours before now found themselves free to rebuild and expand. The threat that had consumed dozens of other galaxies had been eliminated by 12 ships using weapons made from steel and mathematics. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galactic community viewed humanity itself, the quiet species that had been dismissed as primitive metalworkers now found themselves at the center of every major strategic discussion. Their approach to problem-solving, which had seemed so simple compared to advanced energy manipulation and psychic warfare, was suddenly recognized as representing a fundamentally different way of understanding the universe. Admiral Kexter, his crystalline form now permanently brightened by what his species interpreted as respect and gratitude, made a formal proposal during the emergency council session that followed the battle. I move that humanity be granted permanent leadership status within the Galactic Defense Council. Their methods and insights have proven superior to our own in the most critical test we have ever faced. General Brutok, his red eyes glowing with something approaching reverence, seconded the motion immediately. The Gorvan people pledge our full support to human leadership in all future military planning. We have learned that strength comes in many forms, and wisdom often appears in the most unexpected places. Even Seeker of Truth, speaking through. Minds that had been fundamentally changed by their contact with the Reaper consciousness agreed with the proposal. The Mindari Collective recognizes that our understanding of the universe has been limited by our own assumptions. Humanity offers perspectives that complement and enhance our existing knowledge.